and welcome to our LinkedIn Live on do's and don'ts when creating an AI policy. My name is Natasha Bradley, Director of Empower M365, and I'm so excited to be joined by Tracy. Tracy, can you introduce yourself, please?
I can. Thanks, Tasha. Thanks for having me, and pleasure to to have you all on this, joining us on this session. I'm Tracy Hannah-Jones. I've spent over 30 years in information security, data governance, and a whole raft of other things. I work across multiple frameworks and multiple standards, and more recently, I've been involved in sort of building AI management systems for organizations. And looking at things like cyber law, cyber regulations, and putting that all together to make people safe and secure.
Fabulous. So thank you very much, Tracy. So I believe, and when I say believe, I believe that I know why it's important to have an AI policy, but I think it's a good place to start because I come across lots of organizations who have rolled out things like Microsoft Copilot and don't have a policy in place. So I just want to take a start at the beginning. So why is it important to have an AI policy?
Great question and a brilliant starting point. I think an AI policy will lay that foundation for what should be safe, ethical, and effective artificial intelligence integration into any organization. And as a minimum, it just seems to set out the requirements for that organization in terms of its objectives and what it's trying to achieve through the use of AI. So if I can flip it on its head and sort of maybe say what an AI policy is not. So for an AI policy to be effective, it must comprehensively address those aspects and provide really clear guidelines for the ethical, secure, and compliant use of AI technology. And in doing so, there's probably a handful of things that I would sort of say we need to do. There are lots of AI policies that are now muted and floating around on the internet. Great as a starting point, but it's important that you make it your own. And the way you do that is you look at things like efficacy. So where an AI policy ensures that AI technologies are used ethically, what they really need to do is promote fairness, transparency, and accountability across the organization. So if anybody's looking at the recently published ISO 42001 artificial intelligence standard, that's very much focused around risk management. So it's looking that your AI policy should address those risks that you've identified within your organization, what the mitigation actions are to address those security vulnerabilities, biases, misinformation. That there's a whole sort of subsection of 33 very different controls. But your AI policy should really ensure adherence to the legal and regulatory requirements, and that landscape is changing. So more recently, we've seen sort of the introduction of the EU AI Act, and the UK is sort of pulling that through. But if you look at somewhere like the States currently, there are around 88 different sets of legislation, but no one overarching policy. Even down to the likes of Ukraine has one sort of regulation, but it's not set in stone. So this is an emerging landscape. And then kind of just going back to your AI policy, it's critical that it's about guidance and governance. So it really has to provide a clear framework around your AI deployment from the whole AI lifecycle management program. So it's not just about what you release, but actually it's how you begin the design and the ethics that sit behind that, all the way through to the actual change management controls and lots of other things that sort of exist within that. And you're establishing permitted behaviors and uses. So you're saying to everybody, this is what we set in stone, stake in the ground. It will help protect your organization from any sort of bad reputational or sort of malpractice. And then finally, I'll probably sort of say, look, it's about driving innovation and efficiency. The policy is not designed to stop innovation. It's there to build the framework and support the responsible use of AI as you continue to develop your business practices and improve and drive those efficiencies across your organization. And that's done through levels of automation. So, having different impacts and things really to sort of be bearing in mind is your AI policy will look at things like safety, fairness, security, robustness. Risk sources that are related to things like machine learning, so the quality of data that's used in your ML, and then the processes of how you collect data, the sources of risk, and they will impact the objectives of your organization around safety, security. And as I say, it's about looking at the end-to-end lifecycle management program and making sure that your system lifecycle issues through managing risk are aligned and go back into your AI policy. And probably the last part of that is then that technology readiness. And it's looking again at those risk sources that can be related to potentially less mature technologies due to unknown factors. So, that could be system limitations, could be boundary conditions, could be performance drift, but it's about balancing new exciting technology against the more mature technology and actually the competencies that sit between both. So long answer, I'm afraid, but yeah.
Well, it's quite a complicated subject that's emerging daily, isn't it? So it's and when I've been talking to clients and organizations around policies, one of the key topics that come up is around copywriting. So, from their perspective is they're letting their users use the technology to be able to pull back data quicker, faster time, etc. But how do they make sure that they don't foul of copywriting, etc.?
Yeah, so again, a lot of that comes back to, as part of the AI lifecycle management, it's looking at your data management processes that sort of reside with that. So that's not solely the AI policy. That's probably something like an AI lifecycle management procedure, which takes the end-to-end AI lifecycle. And one part of that is around data management. So we've got to look at data preparation. So what are the sources of our data? Where is it coming from? Has it been procured through legitimate means? It's not a list that's just been dumped or has bias or sort of malware or something like that. So we understand the data provenance. Once we understand the provenance and we're assured with that, we need to do data testing. So we need to understand from programming what are the outputs we're expecting. And as part of that testing, validation, verification with the data sets that we have is, does that information give us the right outputs that does not have bias, that does not have discriminatory impacts, does not infringe copyright laws? So it's lots of controls, lots of data protection is absolutely crucial here. And from a legislation point of view, when we start talking about sort of general data protection regulations, DPA, there's a whole plethora of them, sort of globally. We've really got to start to work together with data governance teams along the AI route.
So if we had to look at a policy that was not written correctly and left the organization with a lot of risks, what risk could that organization find themselves in if that policy wasn't robust enough?
Yeah, great question. So without policy, you start to see this sort of myriad of risks that start to arise, and they cover a really wide range of potential threats and vulnerabilities. So let me give you an example. When AI systems operate in complex environments where there's a range of the situations are very broad, there can be a real uncertainty on its actual performance, and therefore the source of risk is complex environments in autonomous driving, for example. If you've got multiple data sources and we don't quite know what we're doing and we're inputting AI into autonomous driving, the conditions that, if they're not correctly calculated, could lead to loss of life. And AI governance, if you start talking about sort of ISO 42001 and other sort of best practice that's coming through, they talk about biases, discrimination, fairness, robustness, and its impact on individuals. It's the impact on groups of individuals, or both, and impacts on societies. And that should always be at the back of your mind when you start to work in this environment. Going back to your copyright sort of conversation, things like data breaches. So, employees might, accidentally, inadvertently input some sensitive information into an AI tool. That could potentially lead to exposure. Confidential data, which will then expose your client's information, and you have a whole different conversation in terms of lawsuits going on. Key area for concern around AI continues to be bias and inaccuracy, and that's that sort of data, by not understanding the risk of what that means. So hopefully you all know that AI systems can produce bias or incorrect results if it's not correctly managed, which can affect in decision making. It can lead to unfair outcomes. It can cause harm to individuals, groups, or societies. So profiling based on inaccurate data will definitely lead to bias. It will definitely lead to discrimination. It could lead people to make poor choices that could, inevitably end in harm to persons. So it's really, looking at the risk, not just of the use of AI as team members, but actually technically the impact to the users of your AI systems or products, or whatever it might be. And the AI policy, the risk of not having an AI policy, it's going to flip it on its head, is around sort of the compliance again. And it's without those clear guidelines, you might fail to meet your legal and regulatory obligations, which could result in fines and challenges, across GDPR and DPA. And I'm not sure if everybody's aware, but the EU AI Act, like GDPR, imposes significant penalties for non-compliance, and they're structured in a tiered system. So under the EU AI Act, noting that the UK, although out of the UK, is working alongside that and will ratify its own version thereof. But there's 3 tiers. So the first tier, the biggest, the scariest tier, is the prohibited AI practices. So any violation that involves prohibited AI practice could result into a 35 million euro fine, or 7% of a company's turnover, global turnover, whichever is the higher amount. Your second one, if you're not quite doing that, the second one then isn't around non-compliance with the obligations. So failing to meet a specific obligation. So for example, those providers or importers or distributors who sort of are making incorrect decisions based on the data, that can lead up to fines of 15 million euros, or only 3% of the global turnover. And then the last part, kind of where lots of us will sit, is providing inaccurate information. So by supplying incorrect, incomplete, or misleading information, can incur fines of up to 7.5 million euros, or 1% of a company's turnover, whichever is greater. And the law is changing constantly. That's probably a thing. So it's really important, again, so just going back to that AI policy, not having it could lead to a whole catalogue of risk. It could lead to manipulation of training data used by the AI in the machine learning. There could be, security vulnerabilities, so injecting false data if there's a gap, and a security gap that would add incorrect or misleading data for the training data set, and therefore the outputs are harmful. You can have modifying existing data, you can delete data, so it's about setting up the rules and regulations, really about how you decrease the inaccuracy of what you're trying to do to control the unintended outputs and support what should be true data sets. And I'll keep coming back to, as we talk through this, but ethical concern. It's that misuse of AI that could lead to ethical dilemmas in a medical situation, autonomous driving situation, a machine in a factory, for example, as well as privacy and discrimination bias.
And I suppose with the landscape keep changing and, the rules and regulations you just mentioned, in your experience, what would be the review date of these policies, or should be a review date?
Yeah. So depending on sort of what governance you follow, but whether you're following sort of NCSC best practice, ISO standards, whatever it might be, typically most organizations will review annually. And I would say, annually is a fair stake in the ground, but AI is changing very quickly as a landscape. So, the establishment of what is robust procedure is constantly changing as we add, we've gone from sort of, LLMs and OpenAI and GenAI. We're now sort of starting about agentic AI and sort of the changes there. So I would say as an absolute bare minimum annually, but really it should be driven by risk. If you are reviewing your risk on a regular basis and you're starting to see your profiling changing, the technologies that you're using, then make sure your AI policy overarches that. So, and when we talk about AI policy, there's a single AI policy that sets out the store for an organization, but behind that should be a set of other sort of policies and processes. So as you're developing and designing, you should be doing things like AI system impact assessments and testing the robustness across your whole estate.
And if an organisation hasn't started the AI policy, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners are in that situation, what's the top 3 things that they should think of to get them started?
Yeah, Only 3.
We could be more if you wish.
Okay, let me talk. I'll try and keep it to 3 because you know what I'm like when I get started. So I would say the first thing that's really important is about strengthening your security protocols. So many breaches within an AI environment will occur due to weak security measures. So if your organization has, for example, ISO 27001, Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essentials Plus, or an equivalent, that's great. You're already there. But you need to control that through regular audits, updating those security systems, and sort of making sure, you know, you're protecting against those vulnerabilities. So strengthen those security protocols, absolutely. I think the second one for me would be data minimization. So collecting only the necessary data for the AI operation. So when you start looking at GDPR regulation, data minimization really comes into play here. And that could potentially reduce the impact if there were a breach. And it approaches the limits of the amount of sensitive data that you could be exposed to. Yeah, so any fines or regulations, you can show the due diligence of data minimization. I think a key one is employee training. So human error, we're all human, we've all done it, we'll continue to do it, is a common factor in data breaches. So it's providing that comprehensive training, not just on cybersecurity now, but actually trying to implement cybersecurity into AI practices and just really, you know, help our people along that it's about how we help prevent accidental exposure of sensitive information. You know, it's quite rare that people really sort of let this stuff out, but let's help our people understand alongside technological controls. I'm going to sneak another one in because I can. Third-party risk management. So, you know, you've mentioned and obviously Empowered works really, you know, really well and great services with Copilot, for example. So AI systems will often rely on third-party services, which can introduce additional risks. So it's about looking at the risk, and it's looking at that third-party supply chain. So you need to conduct your due diligence. You need to make sure that you are, you know, you've ensured robust security measures against third-party providers. Let me give you an example. You know, Copilot, tried, tested in the right environment and securely controlled. Great tool. DeepSeek, for the techies out there, yeah, we love it. It's a great tool, but it's coming from China. So with that comes risk and governance control. So you might have to tighten up your risk and governance and sort of subset of who can actually use things like that. So it's really about looking at third-party risk management. And if you have a sort of a governance, risk and compliance team, or you have ISO 27001, then pull that into your supplier reviews and make sure the due diligence is done around those AI vendors. And I did say last one more, please, one more.
Go on then, go on.
You think of that. So probably the last one I'd throw in there is things like just transparency and user control. And I think it's really important to say that you need to have really clear privacy policies. You need to have very clear user consent mechanisms that can build that trust, and then that just ensures that the users of any system that is developed through AI know how you're handling their data, what it's being used for, and actually you have those data protection controls in place as well. I'll leave it there, but I could go for more.
I was going to say any more before I move on. You're good.
Yeah, we've got a limited amount of time. I think people got
yeah, we've not got long left. So you've given some hints and tips of someone to start. So if you were reviewing an AI policy, what would good look like when you were reviewing someone else's?
So in my personal opinion, I say good is not one that's just lifted off the internet and you've put your branding across it. I audit AI systems, I build AI systems. I can spot an internet lifted policy a mile off. It's a great point to start as a template, but an AI policy should be appropriate to the purpose of your organization, and often what you'll pick is something that might be fitting to a 30,000 staffed organization, when actually you're 140 users. Yeah. So we need to make it appropriate to your organization. What's really key is the AI policy should set out a framework about setting the AI objectives of your organization, and that's the objectives of what you're trying to achieve through the use of AI, not how many people you've trained, for example. Your AI policy must have a commitment. It has to be a commitment from the leadership, from the top, because they will set out the stall about what it is that you are doing and trying to do, and really, it's led from the top. but it carries down to everybody within the organization. And the other part about policy is that, and you mentioned it at the very beginning, is it's about continual improvement. So it's not a case of having a policy, putting in the cupboard and saying, that's great, thanks very much. It's about reviewing it in a consistent manner. And because AI is evolving and changing very quickly, I would even argue that once a year is not enough, but that depends on your organization and what you're trying to do. And make sure that everybody who is a user of AI can see your AI system, because they need to understand what the rules and regulations are that you're setting out as an organization. So make sure it's clearly communicated. And then, you may be asked by suppliers, third parties, clients, whoever that might, regulators, for a copy of your policy. So you need to make sure that it's available to interested parties as appropriate. So don't put anything sensitive in there, don't put anything confidential in there, but have it that it is public facing as required. And then, depending on your organization, you might want to consider sort of topic specific aspects, as needed, that would potentially provide cross-reference to any other policies that you may already have. So if you're, for example, again, you're an ISO 9000 quality, or you're 27001 information security, you can cross-reference those policies. But specific topics, you want to point to things like the use of AI resources and assets. I've mentioned it, and I'll always mention it, AI system impact assessments. It's integral to what you do in terms of building AI solutions. And actually system development, it's a key area. Methodologies, practices are changing all the time. So we just need to sort of be able to to do that. And any relevant policy should guide that development, that procurement for clients, the operation and the use of AIs. So sorry, long answer, but yeah,
that's okay. It's important and good stuff that people are really, really interested in. And I suppose just before we sort of finish, and I must appreciate you've given lots of hints and tips throughout this sort of 22 minute chat. But if you had one top tip to give our listeners before we sort of finish, what would it be? One, Tracy, one.
Oh, okay. I'll try and keep to one. I would say if you're starting from scratch, because there's lots of information that's coming out onto the internet. LinkedIn is a great source. A lot of it is lifted and rebadged and repurposed. But if you're not sure where to start, I would advocate get a copy of ISO 42001 and read the Annex Control B and C section, because it sets out what a mature end-to-end AI system will look like, and it covers things from the actual AI policy through to data governance and provenance to monitoring and measurement, to building, to the development, the full end-to-end cycle. But also it talks about, the Annex C then starts to talk about the type of risks that you might sort of want to discuss as you start to look at this with your wider organization. And it talks about security, it talks about risk, it talks about operational fairness and bias, transparency, and controls to develop a proactive AI policy. I'm going to sneak one more last one in there. And my last
why am I not shocked?
So you know me too well. My last comment is, obviously, I'm Handjo Consultants, but I'm working in partnership with obviously Empower 365. So look, we can support you, and genuinely, I think off the back of this, if anybody's got any more queries and questions, please funnel them through Tasha. Tasha can come and find me, and we can have some one-to-one sessions. So I'll leave it on that one as my last point.
Fabulous. Well, thank you very much for your time, Tracy. It's been an interesting chat around AI policy do's and don'ts. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. And as Tracy said, if you've got any questions, please feel free to contact me. Have a great day, and thanks for listening. Thanks, Tracy.
Bye.
Bye.